Hey guys, my name is Andrew, watching Constantly Gaming, and in today's video we're going to be going over the new standard tier list for October 2020. This is going to be an updated tier list based off of the new bannings that just came out. Escape the Wild, Omnath, and Lucky Clover were just banned, and so what I wanted to do is give you guys an update as to what's been going on since then. You know, the meta has completely blown up, and you know, we weren't really sure what was going to happen after all these bannings. Now, I will say, though, I think this meta is much, much healthier than what was before, I don't want anyone to think that this is a free-for-all, you know? Like, I don't want anyone to think that, you know, anything and everything's playable right now, because we're going to, as I'm going to show you, there are clearly 2 to 3 decks that stand above everything else, and I think are much higher than everything else, specifically one deck in particular. But it is not Omnath. We are not talking about tier 0 decks. Thank God. As you can see, no tier 0 decks. Oh, thank God. Let's go ahead and get right into the video. So, let's start with what I think is going to be the forefront of the format, as usual, and that's going to be Yorion. Really? Yes. I think that the Yorion decks are by far the best decks in the format. Now, what Yorion deck am I talking about specifically? Well, there are a couple of different Yorion decks. There are Azorius Blink decks. There are kind of control-y blue-white decks that I'm going to kind of categorize differently as blue-white. But the specific deck that I'm talking about is Doom Foretold. The Orzhov Doom Foretold. Some versions are Esper, but I think Orzhov is much better. So, what is the deal with this deck? Now, this is an actual deck that was pretty competitive a while ago. When we first got Doom Foretold in Throne of Eldraine. So what it is a enchantment that gains value by playing other enchantments that have a Enter the Battlefield ability and that are kind of useless on its own, and that you can sacrifice, and also, of course, artifacts that you can sacrifice and get value off of it. Because the cool thing about Doom Foretold is that though you can sacrifice your stuff, and then we'll get to other ways of, you know, gaining value off of sacrificing it, you can force your opponent to sacrifice their permanents, and the trade-off is just incredible. Especially with Yorion, what you can do is you can play a bunch of these effects and then blink everything. It's a fairish, kind of control-y kind of deck, while also kind of going above and beyond as far as value-wise, kind of over the other fair decks that are going on. I mean, Yorion is just, you know, it's a value machine. You know, like, being able to play Into the Battlefield abilities, which are super broken when it comes to Magic in general, and then replaying them with a flyer is just incredible. Now, I will say, I do like the 60 card versions that are playing Yorion in the main deck better than the 80 card versions that are playing as a companion, just because I think 60 cards is more consistent, and you can fit in more better cards, and you won't have as much of variance. So, with that said, that's why I have Yorion as number 1. To go along with Yorion at the top of tier 1, what other decks kind of go along with it? And there is 2 other decks, I believe, but let's start with my favorite deck of the whole format, and that is Rakdos Midrange, coming in at tier 1. So Rakdos Midrange is a Kroxa deck trying to gain value by playing a bunch of kind of graveyard-ish synergy cards, along with Kroxa, trying to just kill your opponent by escaping it over and over again, discarding their whole hand, hitting them with a 6/6, and just winning the game that way. You're playing a bunch of really good removal. You're standard Rakdos, mid-range deck. I think it's really good against the other decks that are going on. Like, you're going to be seeing a lot of rogues. I think it's really good against rogues because, you're milling over into a Kroxa and, milling 5 cards with your rogues and then escaping a Kroxa on turn 4. I mean, that does not feel good. Even though the rogues have some kind of anti-graveyard strategies built into them, it's escaping a Kroxa is just too powerful. And yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to say about it. You know, kind of what these mid-range style decks are. We've seen Rakdos mid-range before, back in Theros block before, but it wasn't as good as it is now. And I think mainly because the super crazy unfair decks are out of the format. There's no mana doublers like before. There's no there's no Omnath, there's no Uro, there's no other things that are just oppressing Kroxa down. Kroxa is the only other Titan left because Uro's banned. So I think with that being said, I think compared to, as you were going to see, it's the best thing to fight Yorion, in my opinion, because, yes, you can blink all of your stuff with Yorion, but I mean, the thing is with Kroxa is that their abilities are recursive. Yes, you can kill Kroxa, but you can just bring it back. Yes, you can kill some of their graveyard synergy cards, but they don't really mind their cards being blown up because they can just recur them back. So I think Rakdos is probably the best deck that's going to be up against Yorion. Third best deck, in my opinion, in the meta right now is going to be Demerit Control. So Demerit Control is kind of reminiscent of some of the Demerit Controls we've seen before, playing Drown the Lock, your counter spells, a bunch of kill spells, like Eliminate, played with this really, really powerful engine supporting Loris. So Loris, as you all know, was one of the most infamous cards during the Companion era, is now kind of seeing its way back into the format. I do like the versions where you're actually playing Loris as your companion, because unlike Yorion, where you're having to kind of spend 3 mana just to put it into your hand, putting it into your hand and then play it, it's just you don't have that problem as much with Loris, because first of all, it's much cheaper, but also you kind of wanting to play that long game and eventually get around to playing Loris, playing it, attacking, recurring your resources and getting there. And I feel like against the rest of the meta, maybe not so much Yorion and Rakdos Midrange, against the rest of the format, I think this is a very powerful standard control deck, and it's the best control deck I think in standard right now. So with that being said, not a lot more to say about it. I mean, it's your standard Demerit Control deck, kill spells, discard spells, and Loris to recur all of those back again. So yeah, that's going to be Demerit Control. And now this is where we get to the rest of the meta. So like I've said, these three are kind of the staple of the meta. If you're wanting to play the best decks in the format, I think these three are going to be the best examples. So let's talk about what's kind of fallen on the wayside. First one is going to be Mono Red Aggro. I'm putting it in everything else. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be like, what? Mono Red Aggro? I see it all the time. Trust me, this deck, the Mono Red Aggro, is terrible against these three decks. There is way too much removal in the formats for half of your creatures to survive. You don't have enough burn spells, because Ghost of Ravnica's gone, so you don't have as many burn spells as you would want to try and burn your opponent out. All your spells and cards get just destroyed from Eliminate and all these other kill spells. There's counter spells that are really good against you. There are creatures that are being played that are just bigger and better. Rakdos doesn't necessarily mind playing against Mono Red, because it's not like you're playing a Soulscar Mage and a Monastery Swiftspear like you would in Modern, and then use that prowess triggers to try and kill your opponent on turn 3 consistently. This is a much different situation where you're really dependent on Embercleave, and a lot of times when you cast Embercleave, target your creature, it just gets blown up anyways. So, I mean, I just don't see this deck being as good. Now, I will say, The only I am hesitant to put it into tier 3 only because a lot of people are playing it. It's very cheap to get. It's very easy to access in arena, but mono red is just not where you want to be. I don't think it's playable honestly at all. So stay away from mono red. If you want to play a more aggro deck, I have better options for you. Just don't go towards mono red, and don't sleep on it either. All right, just because this is what the meta looks like now, does it mean the next set comes out and mono red's not at the top either? Because these cards are powerful and they're gonna be here for a while. So don't sleep on it, but don't count on it right now either. So with that being said, that's why I have it in everything else. And let's go to Temur Ramp. I'm going to put Temur Ramp here in tier 2. This is basically Omnath without Omnath. You're basically building up to Genesis Ultimatum instead of Omnath. You're trying to go over the top with very powerful, very over the top, cards, but and payoffs like Genesis Ultimatum. But the problem with this deck and why it's not the new Omnath is because it's more like your traditional ramp deck. Now, what do I mean by that? Over the past year, we've had ramp that is very unfair, and it's unfair because it not only helps you with the ramp side, but it also helps you with the winning side too. Just look at Uro, all right? It's a 3-mana spell that ramps you, gains you life, and reposes itself, and then later on wins you the game. Usually with traditional ramp cards, if you draw one half of the deck, you lose. If you draw the other half of the deck, you still lose. You have to draw a good mix, have a good curve that wins you the game by going over the top and destroying control decks and the things that ramp normally does. But we've gotten so used to these cards like Omnath just being so good by itself. We've got these mid-range-ish, ramp decks that aren't as much traditional ramp. They're just, mid-range decks that have a ramp sub-theme, So that's why I think that this deck isn't as good, because if you draw your big payoffs, your Genesis Ultimatums, and your win conditions, you're gonna lose because you can't ramp into them. But if you draw all of your Cultivates, and your Lotus Cobras, and you don't draw your Genesis Ultimatum or your other, win conditions, then, you lose too. So, I think this is a more fair deck, the most fair deck, ramp deck that we've seen in a long time. But still, don't count this deck out. It's very, very powerful. You still have Lotus Cobra. You still have all the good ramp. You got Cultivate, yada, 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 and Genesis Ultimatum, still a powerful card, but it's going to get countered. I hate to tell you, it's probably going to get countered with, with Round the Lock, so, I still think this is a very powerful strategy. If you're going to have those lucky draws where you just curve right into Genesis Ultimatum and other payoffs and just win the game then and there. But you're not going to see that as consistently as you did before with Uro and Omnath and all that. So, with that being said, that's why I have it at tier 2. So, now I wanted to get to kind of 2 decks, kind of at the same time. It's the adventure decks, but there's 2 versions. There is the kind of Gruul, no, not a Gruul, sorry, no, this is the Gruul version, right here. Then this is the, what is it? Golgari version. Let's try that again. Let's try that again real quick. The next deck I want to talk about is these 2. So we have first Golgari Adventures, and then we have Gruul Adventures. So I have Golgari above Gruul because Golgari is a more mid-range kind of adventure deck, and Gruul is a more aggro kind of fast-paced style of aggro deck. So this is kind of what basically the decks are. These decks are basically Lucky Clover adventure decks, but without Lucky Clover, without your big ramp ramp spells like you had before with the Temur adventure decks that we had before. So these are kind of just the leftover parts creating the adventure deck still. I just don't think right now these decks are as good as they used to be. They're still really good, but I think normally I would put both of these in tier 3. But there's a lot of people on this on this Golgari build right now on Arena, and so I want to put this in tier 2 to just let you know you're going to be seeing this deck a lot. Just make sure that when you're playing against it, kill the Edgewall Innkeeper, don't let them go off, and make sure to watch out because there are some versions that are playing Song of Creation. I'm not a big fan of that strategy too much because I feel like it's too reliant on your opponent being milled out, and it just takes too long, in my opinion. But still, this is a very powerful deck. It's it's very fun deck, definitely, and that's why I have it in tier 2 and tier 3. Then we have kind of mono green aggro. This, in my opinion, mono green Stompy to be exact, is in my opinion the best aggro deck in the game right now in standard. If you're wanting to play aggro, this is where I go. Make your opponent waste their removal on these big creatures that need to be answered. Don't try to play these small creatures that rely on speed to win, because you're not going to get anywhere with that. Play these creatures like Questing Beasts, like Stonecoil Serpent, that scale the longer the game goes, and force your opponent to have to answer them. Stonecoil Serpent, getting past, a Kroxa is very powerful. Getting past a Yorion and all three of these cards right here just will not block a Stonecoil Serpent. It's just an example of the craziness that this aggro strategy is. So I'm thinking that, in my opinion, the stompy, bigger creature version of the aggro strategy is better than the kind of faster mono red version. So that, in my opinion, if you're wanting to play a aggro strategy, this is what I would go for those reasons. So with that said, that's why I have it in tier 2. And then we're going to get to Demerit Rogues. Demerit Rogues I'm going to put in tier 3. I just think there are better versions of what Demerit Rogues is trying to do, which is mill your opponent out. If you want to mill your opponent out of the game, I mean, I guess it's fine, but like you're just going to lose to Rakdos. I mean, imagine you play your second rogue, you milled them for like 5 or 6 cards, and then you hit a Kroxa. Then on turn 4, they escape the Kroxa, and then at that point, you're just so far behind. You have to have a removal spell, and it's just a nightmare. I mean, that's just a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Like, I don't think milling your opponent is necessarily where you want to be right now, because in a lot of cases, you're kind of helping your opponents by milling them. Though I think this deck is super fun, and it's still super good, I'm just not as high on it as other people are. So with that said, that's why I have it in tier 3. Then this is Azorius Control. We talked about it last time, and I've been trying to talk about decks that we talked about last time over again. And Azorius Control is just not where you want to be. If you want to play a control deck, just play something like Yorion Blink. It's just a better version of it. You don't have Teferi anymore. You don't have 5 Fairy. You don't have, you do have Teferi, for example, but I'd much rather play Teferi and like a fair control-y kind of deck with Yorion kind of Doom Foretold build on top of that, if you're really wanting to go that route. So I just don't see it. If you're going late in the game, these decks are going to go over the top of you. If you're going faster, these decks are going to kill you. So it's just not in the best spot. Don't sleep on Dream Trawler. Like I've said, don't count these decks out. More cards come out, things can change. But right now, that's where I have it. And the same thing when it comes to just straight mill. Like, I think these mill decks are not as good as they once were. If you want to mill your opponent, play Demerit or some of these other decks that have that strategy in it. If you really want to, I think the Team Adventure decks, which playing Song of Creation, is probably the best way to mill your opponent out. But yeah, don't just don't play the Demerit mill. There's better ways of doing that strategy. So with that being said, yeah, that's gonna be my updated list. I wanted to make this video like a little faster, but just so many things have changed. It's kind of hard to kind of summarize everything as fast as I can. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.